For most enthusiasts, when they think about traditional handcrafted Japanese elements incorporated into watches, they will go straight to Grand Seiko, and rightly so. They take a lot of inspiration from their nature in and around Japan, as well as traditional Japanese patterns and other cultural symbols. However, you don't need to aspire to such lofty heights to get something like that on your wrist. It might be more achievable than you think. Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we're looking at a watch that is pretty special. I know I've said that pretty often on my channel, but it's definitely the case here. The watch we're looking at today has a dial that is handmade by a master craftsman. It's a black lacquer dial that is in the traditional Japanese Urushi style, which you can see on display in tableware and other items from Japan. They often contrast the deep, rich black color with gold, and this watch does too, but in a more subtle way. This is the SARX029. For a bit of backstory, the word Urushi comes from the Japanese word for lacquer. It is made from the sap of a tree, and both the harvest and application of it is a very involved, specialized process. This means that for every dial on a SARX029, special care and attention went into its production. When they were in production, apparently only 15 per day was made due to this. It's a very striking watch, isn't it? Of course, the dial is the focal point of any watch, but in this case, it's 100% the star of the show. Naturally, a big part of this video will be spent focusing on that part of the watch. But before we get really into it, let's just take a moment to take it in. It's a very deep black that sucks you in, and it's really something that needs to be seen in person to truly appreciate. The cameras can't really do it justice. With that out of the way, let's get stuck into it. Like I said, the effect of using this lacquer is a very rich black that seems to almost absorb the light around it. It's not anything like the Vantablack type dials from Moser that appear as a void of nothingness, but it's not your average black either. Anyway, it's not a void. The surface of the dial is glossy and reflects light when it hits it at the right angles. We can see that happening especially in two areas of the dial, around the hole for the pinion and the hole for the date. Due to the way that these are made, the dial surface is not completely flat around the edges. It's a little bit convex. Think of a drop of water sitting on a table. The surface tension of the water makes it into a dome-like shape. This means that around the edges, the doming falls away and we get light reflected more easily. It's probably more prominent around the date window than the middle of the dial, where the pinion is, but both are a reminder of the fact that this is a handmade dial, rather than something that just came from a factory production line. Now, this is a dress watch, so the hands and markers are going to reflect that. Everything on the dial is printed rather than applied, and that might have something to do with the difficulty of applying markers, or just not wanting to. Either way, I'm happy with everything being printed. We've got Roman numerals marking the hours to keep it classy. Seiko even put a clockmaker's 4, which is 4 vertical lines rather than IV in Roman numerals. That is done to create a better sense of balance on the dial with the 8 o'clock marker that is VIII. The 4 lines used in a clockmaker's 4 have a similar visual weight to the 8 compared to the correct Roman numeral 4. While the printing might initially look like it's white because of that strong contrast against the black dial, it's actually a slightly metallic silver, which helps to make it more legible when it catches the light. The Seiko logo under 12 is also printed in that same silver. But now we're getting to the subtlety of the watch. In the intro, I mentioned that traditional Urushi items use gold together with the black lacquer. This watch does so, but a bit more sparingly. The most obvious use is the hands, and we'll get back to those. But we've also got a bit of gold print around the dial too. The minute track outside the hour markers is in gold, and actually more detailed than I'd expect for a dress watch like this. Not that I'm complaining or anything. I actually prefer ones like this, which have the sixths of a minute marked, as they are more visually interesting to me. I do wish more designs included this. In addition to that, the frame around the date window is also printed in gold, as are the words automatic and 23 jewels underneath the pinion. Within that gold frame at 3, we can see a date wheel that is colour matched to the dial. This white printing on a black background works really well, matching with the hour markers, and helps the dial to keep from feeling out of balance. If you're looking at the watch from a distance, you might not even know that the watch has a date, and that's the best way to integrate one into a design. Then we have the hands, probably my favourite part of the watch besides the dial. They are gold coloured and have a frosted finish to them. This was the right choice, because if they were polished, they'd get lost too easily in the black dial behind them, and it would be very difficult to read the time. The hour and minute hands are elongated leaf shapes, and both extend just a fraction past the circles created by the inner and outer edges of the Roman numerals. The second's hand is also gold in colour and shares that frosted finish. The interesting part of this hand, and probably the reason I like them so much, is that crescent moon counterbalance. It's a simple thing, but makes a huge difference overall. That kind of counterbalance is very reminiscent of those on Creedor watches, which also originate from Seiko, but are many multiples higher in price and finishing. Looking at the dial and hands as a whole, I don't think having everything in gold would have looked nearly as good as it does like this. A dress watch should be a bit more understated and subtle, and that's exactly what Seiko achieved here. Sitting on top of all this is a sapphire crystal that will stay free from scratches to keep your view of that beautiful dial uninterrupted. Seiko have also applied a layer of anti-reflective coating to the underside of the crystal in an effort to further this. It definitely does work to cut down on reflections and glare, but I can't help but wonder why Seiko used blue AR instead of a clear one. You can see it is quite prominent when I turn the watch towards the light in my setup here. It also collects fingerprints a little more easily than I would like. It is, however, slightly domed, which is a nice little touch. Let's take a look now at the case. It's a case that, for me, when I look at it, is uniquely Seiko in design. It draws on elements from other watches in their lineups for inspiration, and manages to make a very wearable dress watch out of measurements that traditionally wouldn't work. Those measurements are 40.5mm across the case, which is on the larger side for a dress watch, combined with a lug-to-lug of 46.5mm and a thickness of 12.2 at the highest point of the domed crystal. The lug width is also a pretty standard 20mm. The case itself has a very curved profile and mixes both brushed and polished finishes. Surrounding the crystal is a polished bezel that is a little more complex than your standard bezel. It has 3 distinct sides that are all at different angles. The lugs are brushed on top and curve both down and inwards as they leave the case. The insides of the lugs have little polished sections, which are very similar to the Sumo, and it's a nice little detail to catch the light occasionally. Even the side of the case is made up of 2 different planes. It cuts back in underneath the bottom of the watch, which helps it to feel thinner than it actually is. These sides are both also polished. From the side here, we can see the crown, which has been signed with the Seiko S. It doesn't screw down, but the caseback does, and provides the watch with a surprising 100 meters of water resistance. That's enough to take it in the pool or to the beach, though I'm not sure you'd want to be wearing a dress watch into the pool in the first place. Either way, if that's your idea of a good time, the watch has got you covered. That caseback is a display caseback, giving you a look inside the watch and at the movement. It's a 6R15 movement, which was the standard for mid-range Seikos back in the day when this was made. The rotor has some nice decoration in the form of Geneva striping. Like the NH35 and more recent 6R35, this movement hacks, hand winds, and beats 6 times per second. Because I bought this one second hand, I don't have the original strap it came with. Looking at the stock pictures of it, we can see a crocodile print strap with matching gold accent stitching. That accent stitching in particular looks really nice on the watch, but this plain black leather one I have here is also a nice fit for the watch. The dial is the star here, so the fact that the strap is about as simple as you can get means it doesn't draw any unnecessary attention to itself. I'm not saying the original strap was loud or overpowering, but I do like the simplicity of this one. Having covered the watch, now let's get it on wrist and see how it wears. As I said earlier, the 40.5mm case size is on the larger side for a dress watch, but considering that my Presage Starlight is the same size, I don't think it's too big. 41 might be, but with the short lug-to-lug of this case, it will fit a range of wrist sizes comfortably. As I turn my arm, you can really see that Urushi dial in action, catching reflections here and there. The watch sits very flat on wrist and is thin enough to not get in the way of things. For my 7-inch wrist, I'm really happy with the way it wears. It's been a glowing review so far, hasn't it? And why not with such a gorgeous dial like this one? To be honest, I don't think there is anything I would change about this watch other than swapping the blue anti-reflective coating for a clear one on the crystal. I'm big on interesting dials, and this one is definitely up there on that list in my collection. Even though I'm not living in Japan anymore these days, with this watch I can feel like I have a little bit of Japan with me through a handcrafted dial. What do you think about this watch? Have you seen one of these in person, or one of the other more recent colours like green? Is the lacquer material for the dial just a gimmick, or something of cultural and artistic value? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.